After nearly 2 decades on Texas death row, Frances Elaine Newton was put to death by lethal injection. To some, she was a cold-blooded murderer who killed her husband and 2 young children for money. To others, she was a woman wrongfully convicted, a victim of weak evidence and a system eager to close the case. But how did this young mother end up strapped to a gurney inside the Huntsville unit? Tonight, we're going to walk through the case from the very beginning and ask the same haunting question that has lingered for decades. Was justice truly served? A warning before we begin. This case involves the murder of children and graphic descriptions. Viewer discretion is advised. It was April 7, 1987, a spring evening in northwest Houston. Just before 8:30 p.m., Harris County Deputy J.C. Ricks received a call about a possible shooting at an apartment complex on West Mount Houston Road. When Deputy Ricks pulled into the parking lot, he saw 21-year-old Frances Newton waiting outside with her cousin, Sandra. They looked shaken, but what he found inside the unit was far worse than anyone expected. On the living room sofa was 23-year-old Adrian Newton, Frances's estranged husband. He had been shot once in the head at close range. In the bedroom, their 7-year-old son, Alton, lay motionless in his bed. And in the crib just feet away was 21-month-old Farah, the Newtons' baby daughter. Both children had been shot in the chest. 3 lives gone. No signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen. Whoever had done this had walked straight in, executed the family, and left. But Frances and Adrian's relationship had been unraveling for months. Adrian, by many accounts, was struggling with drug use, which created constant tension in their household. They were separated but still shared the same apartment. Both had started seeing other people. But no one, not family, not friends, expected it to end in blood. Adrian's brother, Sterling, had been staying at their house during the time of the murders. And that night, he came home around 6 p.m., but Frances asked him to leave again so she could talk to Adrian about their problems in private. Not long after, around 6:45 p.m. That night, Adrian was on the phone with Ramona Bell, a woman he had been dating. Frances had answered the phone first, and even after handing it to Adrian, Ramona could hear her in the background. During that call, Adrian told Ramona he was tired, but he didn't want to go to sleep until Frances left because he didn't feel safe with her in the house. And nobody knew just how right he was because not even an hour later, between 7 and 7:30 p.m., he and his children were dead. Earlier that evening, Frances had gone to her cousin Sandra's house. But before the 2 women left to return to Frances's apartment, Frances took a blue canvas bag out of her car and stashed it inside an abandoned house nearby, property that belonged to her parents. Frances and her cousin eventually made their way back to the apartment. But when they stepped inside, the sight that greeted them was devastating. Adrian and the 2 children had been shot. Panicked, they dialed 911, though it was already far too late. All 3 were gone. Earlier that evening, Adrian's friend, Alance Harrison, had arranged to meet up with him. They had spoken during the day, and between 7 o'clock and 7:15 p.m., Alance tried calling again to confirm their plans. Frances picked up the phone and asked him to hold, but she never returned. For about 45 minutes, Alance stayed on the line before finally hanging up in frustration. He kept calling back, but no one answered until nearly 9 p.m., when Sandra finally picked up. Her words left him stunned. Adrian had been shot. Later that same night, Sandra told investigators about the blue bag Frances had hidden in the vacant house next door. Officers searched the property and uncovered the bag. Inside was a .25 caliber Raven Arms pistol, the very weapon that had been used in the murders. But how that gun ended up there quickly became one of the most critical and complicated questions in the entire case. At the time, Frances and Adrian were still legally married, although their relationship was strained and both were involved with other partners. The pistol found in the abandoned house actually belonged to Michael Mouton, a man Frances had been dating, but he told investigators he hadn't seen it in months. He had loaned it to his cousin, Jeffrey Frell. Jeffrey wasn't just a cousin. He had also been Frances's childhood friend, and by then he had started a romantic relationship with her just over a month before the shooting. Jeffrey admitted he usually kept the pistol in a drawer in his bedroom. He also said Frances often did his laundry, meaning she had regular access to it. To investigators, this was crucial. It meant Frances had both the motive and the opportunity to commit the crime. The day after the killings, she accompanied Detective Michael Perinello back to the apartment and pointed out the clothes she had worn that night. Those garments were collected for testing. Later, a state forensic analyst testified that her skirt showed traces of nitrite residue consistent with gunpowder discharge, specifically in the area around her waistline, suggesting a weapon had been fired at close range. The case against Frances grew stronger when detectives uncovered financial records. Just 3 weeks before the murders, she had taken out 3 life insurance policies, one on herself, one on Adrian, and one on little Farah. Her son Alton already had a policy. Each was worth $50,000, and Frances was the sole beneficiary on Adrian's and Farah's policies. What raised the most suspicion was the timing. The life insurance policies had only taken effect about 3 weeks before the killings. Later on, Frances admitted that she had forged Adrian's signature on the documents. He had no idea the policies even existed. She explained that even if Adrian had known, he never would have agreed to make his estranged wife the sole beneficiary of his coverage. According to Frances, she kept the policies hidden because she wanted the money set aside for the children and worried Adrian would interfere. But to prosecutors, it didn't look like a mother planning for her children's future. It looked like the foundation of a calculated scheme. However, from the beginning, Frances claimed the murders weren't about her, but about Adrian. According to her, Adrian owed $1,500 to a local drug dealer named Charlie, and that debt had finally caught up to him. In her version, she believed someone connected to that dealer had carried out the murders in retaliation for the debt. But prosecutors weren't buying it. Adrian's family also rejected the story, insisting he didn't use drugs and that Charlie didn't exist. Adrian's mother famously told reporters, "Charlie? There ain't no Charlie. She is Charlie." On October 25, 1988, Frances Elaine Newton was convicted of capital murder for killing more than one person in the same incident. The jury sentenced her to death. But the case didn't end there. Years later, doubts began to creep in. Ballistics reports showed some confusion over the murder weapon. Was there a second gun at the scene? And if so, had it ever been tested properly? And the questions didn't stop there. A relative claimed that a cellmate had bragged about committing the murders. And at least one juror later said they would have voted differently if they had seen all the evidence. Still, every appeal was denied. In 2004, just hours before Frances's scheduled execution, she was granted a 120-day reprieve so forensic evidence could be retested. But the results did not overturn her conviction. Her skirt, which might have held vital residue evidence, had been contaminated over the years. The bullets were matched to the gun she had hidden. The courts ruled that nothing new had been presented that could alter the case. On September 12, 2005, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles voted unanimously against clemency. The U.S. Supreme Court denied her final appeal. Her execution was rescheduled. On September 14, 2005, Frances Elaine Newton was led into the execution chamber at the Huntsville unit. She did not request a special last meal, eating the same food served to all inmates that day. When asked if she had any final words, she shook her head slightly and whispered, "No." As the lethal injection began, she turned her head toward her family in the witness room. Her lips moved faintly, but whatever she tried to say never came out. Within minutes, she was pronounced dead at 6:17 p.m. She was 40 years old. Witnesses left the chamber divided. Frances's parents, who had pleaded for mercy until the very end, stood in quiet grief. Adrian's family felt no closure. Some believed Frances's story had stolen too much focus from the victims. One cousin said, "Justice would have been an apology. We never got that." To this day, questions remain. Some believe the evidence against Frances was too weak for the ultimate punishment. Others believe the jury reached the only possible conclusion. So, what do you think? Was Frances Elaine Newton a mother who plotted the murder of her family for money? Or was she a victim of circumstantial evidence and a justice system unwilling to admit mistakes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more true crime stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.